There isn't any doubt that we couldn't do the job at all in a free society without a very, very active press. Now, on the other hand, the press has the responsibility not to distort things for political purposes, not to just take some news in order to prove a political point. It seems to me their obligation is to be as tough as they can on administration, but do it in a way which is directed towards getting as close to the truth as they can get, and not merely because of some political motivation.
How did Hollywood go from Republican David Selznick, who produced Gone with the Wind, to liberal David Geffen?
While the left was never able to take over the White House, while George McGovern was not able to be victorious, Hollywood was taken over by the left, and they've never relinquished it. And in fact, I would argue that the right has abdicated its place in Hollywood because they were told that you're not wanted here anymore, and they never fought for it. So I don't know who I have more contempt for, the left for its totalitarian behavior towards those that disagree with them, or the right, the conservative movement, for just allowing for it to happen and not to fight back.
Look, sometimes I do despair that we have to come together at on such regular occasions to defend free speech. But then I remind myself why we do it. And if we think about it, liberty is unfinished business. It was unfinished in 1688 when Abraham Lincoln delivered that famous speech, just 266 words, when he recalled the birth of a nation that had been conceived in liberty. And he honoured the dead, those who, he said, gave the last full measure of devotion for fighting for freedom. Lincoln called on us, the living, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work of liberty. He implored us to take increased devotion to this cause of liberty.
You cannot get a film produced now that has Islamist terrorists. You can get movies produced. In fact, you see them all over the place in which people of traditional values or corporations, American corporations, are the bad guys. And I know people within the system who tell me how this plays out. One thing I've been able to find out over the last 10 years is more money now comes from foreign box office, 65% to 35%. That wasn't always the case.
You make most of your money on your foreign releases.
So you're catering to the foreign audience, and so we may have an invested we may have an investment against radical Islam, but the rest of the world wants to kind of keep at bay and doesn't want to take them on, doesn't want to foment rage against that community.
Instead of fueling the marketplace of ideas, the media too often fuels a marketplace of outrage, where debates are stifled. Let me give you an example. When a terrorist took 18 people hostage at gunpoint at the Lynn Cafe in Sydney late last year, sections of the media were more interested in extolling the virtues of a hashtag campaign called I'll Ride With You and predicting Islamophobia among Australians than discussing the unfolding Islamic terrorism inside that Martin Place cafe. To them, man Haron Monis was just a disgruntled loner, a madman with killing on his mind who just happened to have a black and white flag, just happened to demand an Islamic State flag, and who just happened to pledge allegiance to the Islamic State. We need more people in the media, though, to point out that when a killer slaughters people in the name of Islam, we should take him at his word.
Domestic politics. In the 2008 election cycle, the entertainment industry contributed $47 million to political campaigns, $36.5 to Democrats, $10.4 to Republicans. So Hollywood contributes to Democrats over Republicans by a margin of about 4-1, which suggests that few thousand people who live down there on the coast of California and Los Angeles and environs exerts an enormous influence over one of the nation's great national parties.
Yeah, the first job I took in Los Angeles was working for a producer, and he asked me to take Senator Frank Lautenberg around, and I took him to Don Henley's house, and the senator from New Jersey came out and said, hey, he's going to do a fundraiser for me. He's going to perform, and all the celebrities are going to come. And I started to figure out how this system works. What does New Jersey have to do with Don Henley in Los Angeles? That's fine and good if that's legal. But what I find offensive in this system is that the conservatives that I know in Hollywood, and there are a lot, cannot give money because through a simple FEC search, their names will come up as Republicans, and then the word will spread around town that they're Republican, and there is a strong likelihood that many people who would have ordinarily hired them will not hire them.
The problem with a lot of the news, the problem with the fake news critique, is that it's encompassing a lot of angles on the news. So it's not that the news itself is wrong, it's angles on it. It's like how PolitiFact does their analyses. So PolitiFact will say about, Mitt Romney will say, this happened during the campaign. Hillary Clinton said something about she liked open borders. Trump goes on stage and says, Hillary Clinton says she likes open borders. PolitiFact analyzes it and gives it a half true, right? And he's just repeating exactly what she said. But say, but his implication was that she was saying X, Y, and Z. Right. I was like, well, now you're calling his stuff fake news, but you're the actual fake news because you're reading implications that you're reading into him. Once you get into reading other people's implications, you end up in some pretty dicey territory. But it used to be that when there was actual fake news, people lost their jobs, right? Like Jason Blair promulgated fake news and lost his job at a publication that we on the right hate, the New York Times. But there's a difference between that and the angle on the news is wrong. Are the facts of the story right and the angle is wrong? That's not fake news. That's you don't like the angle on the story.
Right.
And so, but the left and the right should recognize this. Not everything that comes from the Washington Post or New York Times is false. It may just be that the angle that they're giving you is an angle that you don't like, or an angle that doesn't reflect underlying truths. But are the facts of the story right? Yeah, the facts of the story are right. So when the New York Times reports something like, when the New York Times reports if they'd reported the hands up, don't shoot thing, just straight, that's fake news. If they report that a black guy was killed by a white officer in Ferguson, Missouri, and then they proceed to report it as though it's a serious problem all across the country, the fake news part of that is their angle. It's not that a black guy was shot by the white guy, in Ferguson, Missouri.
There's no point talking about the importance of liberty around free speech without first reminding ourselves of why it matters, of going back to first principles, because sometimes those first principles get lost amidst new fads and orthodoxies. Free speech is both the oil and the fuel that keeps the ideals of the Enlightenment working. It's vital to that central piece of machinery, that marketplace of ideas, where we test ideas, where we work out which ones work and which ones don't, and it enables us to progress as a society rather than stagnate. So what is the role of the media in this unfinished work of liberty? Well, surely it's to question, to challenge, to explore, to be intellectually honest and intellectually curious. And when we in the media stop doing these things, I think we stop servicing that machinery that powers the marketplace of ideas.
What difference does it make that Hollywood is so far to the left? It's a small community, a few thousand lefties running the entertainment business, so what?
Well, would you hire, if Madison Avenue is willing to hire an actor and give him $1 million to sell Sapporo beer in Japan, that actor must be worth that money because they're going to get the audience to buy that specific brand of beer. When the collective of Hollywood sends a message to the rest of the world that affirms the worst narrative about the United States, that only tells half of the story, or perhaps not even half of the story, it ends up having a net effect, especially when a left-leaning European press, their sensibilities are in simpatico. And what I think is at play is a lot of insecure actors who didn't go to college and feel intimidated by people of a higher intellect, take their movies to Cannes or San Sebastian, and they find themselves not around the working class of France or Spain. They find themselves around the elite of the elite of the elite. And they're foolish enough to suppose that just because they smoke their cigarettes like this, French critics are superior somehow. Right. Well, look, there is such a limitation of the point of view that comes out of Hollywood, especially on political movies.
The Washington Post called me recently and they asked, if you're trying to determine whether a news source is credible or not, what are sort of some quick keys? Yeah. And I said, well, the easiest thing is, are they open with their bias? And and do they run stories that counter their bias? Right? If they're a news outlet and they only run left-wing stories, and they're left-wing sites, they only run left-wing stories, they never run a story that counters anything that they say, then you should double check for sure.
Probably not.
Right? They're probably just a propaganda outlet.
Following the Charlie Hebdo terrorist attacks, people, as you know, flocked to join free speech marches right across the globe, declaring "Je suis Charlie." Well, good on them, I think, for showing solidarity. I was in New York that day, and I walked past a tiny shop on a street corner in Soho, and the owner of the shop had put up a rather grimy poster on his grimy window that said "Je suis Charlie." And on a chilly New York day, it warmed my heart to see that. But that's all it did, because we won't win this long and sinister battle over Western freedoms with unity walks or neat slogans or hashtag trends on Twitter. We need more people in the media to point out the humbug and the hypocrisy.
Being the Hollywood conservative, I defer to the DC crowd when it comes to policy. I'm not a policy guy, but what I am obsessed on, and I'm granted a great perspective of media bias because of what I've done in the media, my relationship with the New York Times, the Associated Press, what is the traditional media, ABC, NBC, every single day paying attention to the text and realizing, oh my goodness, these people really are ideological, and they really are in control, and they really do mean business. Everything to me is media bias, and what talk radio has done has focused on the New York Times, the AP, HBO, and any place where The View, ABC, CBS, NBC, Los Angeles Times, you know it, the mainstream media. Our media has set its sights on the mainstream media as a checks and balance, and we've done a pretty good job.
Right.
What we haven't done is that on Hollywood, and Hollywood has a far greater sway.
In the media and beyond, there is a norm of anticipatory surrender and self-censorship. Instead of self-censorship, we need more intellectual curiosity and honesty.
Best indicator is if somebody's hated by both sides. That's a pretty good indicator that they're at least baseline honest.
Yeah.
Right, that's like that. There's a level of honesty, and what I mean by that is not people who are obviously conspiratorial, but people who are getting flack from every side because they don't please one side all the time. It's not a foolproof test, but it's an okay test for people who tend to be more honest.
The media must play a critical role in keeping alive the marketplace of ideas. Too often it chooses silence, or it becomes an echo chamber for the marketplace of outrage. And why is the media's role so critical? So that those who defend Western freedoms are too many to stand out.
Yeah, I mean, when there's no gatekeeper, the good news is there's no gatekeeper. The bad news is there's no gakeeper.
Yeah.
Right.
So what do you think?
It's not a fully great thing because nothing has emerged yet that acts as maybe that's just because we're demanding more of people, but people have to demand more of it. I'm not saying there should be somebody who, I'm not the gatekeeper, you're not, no one's the gatekeeper, but I'm my own gatekeeper, right? I analyze the news for myself, and I don't just believe every headline that I see on Facebook.
Yeah.
And that I do think is a concern, because that's going to polarize the news. If you're just picking the headlines that reinforce your bias, then you're not likely to achieve anything remotely resembling the truth.
Daily Kos, MoveOn.org, Democratic Underground, Huffington Post. They dominate the internet, wouldn't you agree, or not? Or do you think it's relatively evenly balanced? The left is ahead, isn't it?
I would say the left is ahead because what all of those sites do is protect the mainstream media. Before those sites became dominant and the mainstream media granted them an authority that they didn't grant the equivalent blog sites on the right, these sites are there to protect them from future Swift boat stories, to protect them from future Dan Rather stories, because these stories would start rising through the right-wing blogosphere, and people on the left were thinking, we don't want this story to make it to the mainstream media. And so they expected that John Kerry would come out and defend himself against the Swift boat vets. And when he didn't, he was destroyed. And so that's what these people do in a very coordinated fashion with George Soros's money, with heavy coordination with the Democratic Party. They feed these people information, they feed them ideas.
So the bad stories get smothered on the internet before they make it to television.
Yes.
We know what's happened with PragerU videos, where they've been put on restricted lists. I did an interview with John McCain, who is on cable news every single day.
Yeah, he's their favorite.
YouTube decided to demonetize it.
Yeah.
I mean, I did my interview with Ayaan Hirsi Ali, they demonetized. We have all kinds of stories now of things getting hurt in algorithms, even Milo being banned. I get it, Twitter can do what they want.
I was
They're a
against it,
private
as I say, I
company.
was against the ban.
Yeah, so all of this stuff is starting to add up to something, right?
Yeah, it is.
That there's something cracking down on this new Wild West out here.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that you've seen Twitter pay for some of that in market share.
Yeah.
It's going to be incumbent on people on the right to build an alternative structure to these things, and that's very expensive.
We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. I am not asking your newspapers to support an administration, but I am asking your help in the tremendous task of informing and alerting the American people. For I have complete confidence in the response and dedication of our citizens whenever they are fully informed. I not only could not stifle controversy among your readers, I welcome it. This administration intends to be candid about its errors. For as a wise man once said, an error doesn't become a mistake until you refuse to correct it. We intend to accept full responsibility for our errors, and we expect you to point them out when we miss them. Without debate, without criticism, no administration and no country can succeed, and no republic can survive. That is why the Athenian lawmaker Solon decreed it a crime for any citizen to shrink from controversy. And that is why our press was protected by the First Amendment, the only business in America specifically protected by the Constitution, not primarily to amuse and entertain, not to emphasize the trivial and the sentimental, not to simply give the public what it wants, but to inform, to arouse, to reflect, to state our dangers and our opportunities, to indicate our crises and our choices, to lead, mold, educate, and sometimes even anger public opinion. This means greater coverage and analysis of international news, for it is no longer far away and foreign, but close at hand and local. It means greater attention to improved understanding of the news, as well as improved transmission.